Thank you, Professor. Please sit down. If you will.
Thank you. Professor Ho, I think in answer to one of the questions I asked you earlier, you said you couldn't recall whether the GWC adopted a code of conduct. I wonder if we could be just shown document GWC 0.0001, 0.0011, 0.0003. Do you recall whether, you may, if you wish to, just scroll through some of the pages, whether you remember receiving a document that looking something like that during the time you were a member?
Oh, sorry, I thought it was going to scroll.
Yeah, would you like to have a look through it before answering that question, or have you seen the cover page? Has it jogged your memory at all?
It doesn't jog my memory, but I will say that's dated January 2018, and we didn't have a GWC meeting in January. So it's a bit hard to tell if it went to the GWC exactly when that happened.
Okay, but I think I'm right in saying, I think I heard your answer earlier that doesn't jog your memory, so you have no recollection of this document.
It actually doesn't jog my memory.
Do you have, just to be clear about this, any recollection of any other code of conduct being prepared during the time you're a member of the GWC?
I didn't remember that, although I know from one of the papers that you've shown this morning that there was.
Okay. When you left the GWC, did you keep the papers that you had that were personally yours, or did you return everything that had been provided to you at the time you left?
When I commenced with the GWC, we used to get our papers in paper form, so they were lever arch files. Along the way, I returned those to the Department for Secure Disposal, so didn't save any hard copy material. As we, like lots of other places, moved to e-papers, that was on a departmental iPad. All of those papers I deleted as I went, and also returned the iPad. So there is nothing that I kept beyond my term.
So you've retained none of the records
Nothing.
you received. Well, you've said in your statement that you're familiar with conflicts of interest procedures from the other boards you'd been on at the time you joined the
Yes.
GWC. During the period that you were a member, were there times when either you or other members of the GWC made declarations of actual or potential conflicts of interest during board meetings?
The declarations of conflict were a specific agenda item at each meeting. It wasn't something that was skirted over. It was a proper item that was considered at each time. And there was also, as a formal part of the agenda, space for people to indicate whether they had been in receipt of any gifts, gratuities or hospitality. There were twice when I registered that, and there were a couple of other examples where I asked the question, does this present any kind of conflict or something that should be formally in the minutes, where it was, the indication was no, it's not.
Okay, can I take the first? You go two examples. Were you referring to gifts or to actual conflicts at the time you made declarations?
Neither of those. They were hospitality.
The twice you made declarations for hospitality?
Yes.
Okay, what was the procedure having made the declaration? And first, who was it in each case that what was the nature of the declaration of interest?
One was attending the opening of what was then new as the Pearl Room, and the second was going to the opening of Crown Towers Hotel Complex.
Okay, so the Pearl Room is a room at the casino,
yes.
and you attended an opening of that?
Yes.
And was that at the invitation of Crown Resorts or one of the Crown companies?
I don't know anything about Crown companies. I felt confident in accepting each of those invitations. There was some time apart in terms of when they came, because they didn't come to me as an individual and at my home address or individual email address. They came via the department. So I knew already that the department knew of the invitations. I took the fact that they were forwarded on to all members of the respective GWC, that the department was in agreement with us attending, and for any of us who did attend, we declared that we had attended at the subsequent GWC meeting.
Okay, and do you recall who attended? Who are the other people who attended?
I would be guessing in terms of the Pearl Room, who from the GWC attended. From the opening of Crown Towers Hotel Complex, there were at least two other GWC members, and I'm not going to remember their names. I mean, I can't. That's just gone.
That's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
So can you tell me what the procedure? So having made a declaration in those instances, what was the procedure then to deal with that at the board meeting?
That was recorded in the minutes.
So the procedure was to record the declaration in the following minutes.
Yes.
Okay, there were, and I think you mentioned two instances where you made a declaration, but they were not considered to be of sufficient importance, if you like, to record. Can you give an example of those? What they were?
One, which kind of sounds a little silly now, but I hope points to how seriously I took my role on the GWC. I was going to a function at the Crown Towers, one of their function rooms, and because it was a wet evening, had parked in the undercover car park without knowing that the only way I could get from that car park through to Crown Towers was to cross the main gaming floor of the casino itself. Now, I hadn't done that. I steered clear of that while I was a member of the commission, and that was something that I raised in terms of I've been on the main gaming floor. I didn't stop. I didn't play any games, but I've been there, and that may show on camera. I just need to let the Gaming and Wagering Commission know.
I see. And the other example, do you remember?
Look, I can't recall. It would have been something similar, I think.
And in respect of other members, were there any occasions, to your recollection, where there was a declaration of a conflict of interest, as in an item on the agenda in which they had an interest of some kind?
Look, I can't recall that. One of the things that it feels like it was introduced 4 or 5 years ago, is we had to do an annual statement that went to declarations including related party benefits. Now, I completed mine each time. I didn't see the completed forms of the other GWC members. So whether there was anything in that, I have no idea.
Are you referring to as part of the public sector
I am.
commissioner's paperwork?
Yes.
Was there, to your knowledge, other than recording declarations or of that nature in the minutes, any other? Was there a place where there was a record kept, if you like, a register of all of the declarations from time to time?
I don't know if there was a register, but I do know that each declaration, if it was accepted as valid declaration was recorded in the minutes of that meeting.
Okay, now, during the period that you were a member of the GWC, Mr Connolly was the Deputy Director of the department and also the Chief Casino Officer.
Yeah, not for the whole period.
I understand, not for the whole period. So for what period was he in those roles, to your recollection?
Mr Connolly was there when I first started on the commission. He then went to another government department. From memory, it might have been Fisheries or whatever the name of that department was. That was for a number of years, and then he came back to this department. I wouldn't be able to put a time frame on his return.
Okay, now, he also filled the role of Deputy Chair of the GWC from time to time, didn't he?
Yes.
Did he attend, to your knowledge, effectively all meetings of the GWC, either as Deputy Chair or as the Chief Control Officer, Casino Officer?
I don't recall a time when Mr Connolly's presence in the room was because he was Chief Casino Officer. I don't remember that hat being worn when he was in the room, albeit the difficulty in separating those things. When Mr Connolly was in the room, it tended to be because he was in his departmental role in terms of Deputy Director General.
I see. Now, if at any of the meetings that Mr Connolly attended, if he had an actual or potential conflict of interest regarding an item of business on the agenda, would you have expected that he would have made a declaration to the meeting of that conflict?
If he was part of the decision-making process, yes.
And speaking generally again, if he had an actual or potential conflict of interest regarding his performance in the role of Chief Casino Officer, would you have expected he would declare that to the members of the GWC?
I would expect that he would declare it to the department. I don't know that I had an expectation about a declaration to the GWC.
Why do you say that you would not have had an expectation that the Chief Casino Officer would not have declared any conflict of interest to the GWC itself?
Yeah, I don't think I said that he wouldn't have. I said that I didn't anticipate it.
Yes, I think you didn't have that expectation, but why did you not have that expectation that as the GWC, with responsibility for control of the casino, that the Chief Casino Officer wouldn't declare conflicts of
I
interest?
saw it as part of his role as an employee of the department.
So was it your expectation that the department would deal with any conflicts of interest that he may have had?
That is my expectation.
And is it your expectation that if he had declared a conflict of some nature to the department, someone in the department would have made the members of the GWC aware of it?
I think to me that's the same. It's not something that I anticipated at the time. I think we can all have some hindsight in this process.
I'm talking in the abstract at the moment, but I mean, for example, if there was a paper that Mr Connolly had prepared, by way of example, and he had a conflict of interest in respect of that paper, is it not something you would expect to have known about before you were required to make a decision on that?
Oh, absolutely.
So your expectation would be that if there was a declaration of conflict by the Chief Casino Officer, that it would have been brought to the attention of the GWC?
Yes.
And do you recall if there was any time during which you were a member of the GWC, there was any declaration or information provided to you of a declaration of a conflict of interest or an interest of Mr Connolly?
There may have been, but I don't recall anything specific.
Okay, again, just going back to some of the questions I asked you earlier, when you say you don't recall, does that mean you don't have a positive recollection either way? It may have happened or it may not have happened?
That's correct.
When you joined as a member of the GWC, who was Mr. Connolly in the position then, or someone else?
I don't know.
Okay. Now you mentioned a period during which he was and then he wasn't the chief casino officer. In that period, do you recall who was fulfilling the function of chief casino officer?
It may have been an employee named Nicola, but once again, I don't remember her last name. And I'm guessing as to whether or not she was in the position.
So you don't have a clear recollection of who that person was in that period?
No.
Do you remember the process by which the chief casino officer was appointed?
That was a matter for the department, not the GWC.
So are you saying that the GWC had no role to play in the selection of the person who filled the function of chief casino officer?
That's my understanding.
So can you just explain how the process worked from your recollection and understanding?
I don't know. It didn't come to the GWC. For me, that was a matter that was internal to the department, and the department used whatever its processes were to align that employment.
Was there any opportunity for you to be consulted on the appointment, to your recollection?
None to which I'm aware.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is what you're describing that the appointment was made and you were told about it afterwards? Is that
Yes,
essentially
that's
the process?
correct.
Were you provided with any information concerning the expected role or performance of that person in the function of chief casino officer?
Not that I can recall.
Were you ever given, to your recollection, for example, a document that set out the terms and conditions of their appointment?
I don't recall anything like that coming to the GWC.
What was your understanding of the function of the chief casino officer?
Probably naively, I saw it as an oversight role of other functions performed within the department.
Okay, so can I just ask you then what you mean by other functions performed within the department? Because bearing in mind the name of this office is Chief Casino Officer.
Yes.
So what are the other functions you are referring to in that answer?
Well, Mr. Connolly wasn't alone in terms of working on casino matters. So I saw him as Chief Casino Officer as overseeing, supervising or managing others within the department who worked in that area.
Okay, are you now referring to the inspectors in particular?
They would definitely be included.
Okay, are there any other people that you had in mind when you're thinking of his supervisory role?
There may well be, policy people, but once again, I'm guessing a bit.
All right. So were you aware as a member of the GWC who he was supervising?
Only in terms of broad functions. So, for instance, when I said yes, the inspectors would definitely be in that mix, there would be others that I expect would be in the mix without me being able to even name the positions.
Okay. Were you? So was there a? I'll take it back one step. Sorry, I'll withdraw that. With respect to the inspectors,
Yep.
How were they appointed to your knowledge? Were they appointed by the GWC itself?
No, they were departmental employees.
And so who selected them for the position as inspector, to your knowledge?
That had nothing to do with the GWC. That was a departmental process and decision.
Was there any process by which the GWC was consulted on the appointment of inspectors?
No.
What about the number of inspectors required?
Periodically, we received information about that. mostly as it related to whether the automation of security, my words, the automation of security at Crown meant that not as many departmental inspectors were required to be on the floor.
Right.
We were also advised when the focus of their work shifted because of the possibility of industrial action by them coming to the fore.
Okay, and with respect to at least one of those, I would like to come back to that and ask you
Yeah.
some more specific questions. But at this moment, I just want to ask you more general questions about this process. So, in your answer, are you describing essentially being informed of decisions that had been made within the department after those decisions had been made, concerning, for example, the number of inspectors? So you were told these are the number of inspectors that will be doing
Yes.
inspections at the Perth Casino.
Yeah.
Was there any opportunity, in your view, for the GWC to review or consider the adequacy of the number of inspectors and their performance of their function at the Perth Casino?
In terms of what I've referred to as the automation of security at Crown, the GWC was much more concerned that that automation met requirements in terms of the department being able to go back and investigate anything, much more than the particular role or numbers of inspectors.
Okay. That particular event resulted in a reduction in the presence of inspectors on the floor in the casino, I think you said earlier. Was it your understanding it resulted in a reduction of the number of inspectors required to perform inspections and audits altogether, or just the way they were performing their role?
I can't recall, because the inspectors did more than inspect at the casino.
Okay, so the inspectors had, I know I'm focusing here on the casino in particular. To your knowledge, were there specific employees of the department allocated to perform the work of supervision or monitoring of the activities at the Perth Casino?
There had been, but the GWC didn't actually have anything to do with the inspectors.
Were you provided with any information about the number of inspectors, who they were, and what activities they were undertaking at the Perth Casino?
I expect that at some stage we probably were provided with how many. I don't recall being provided with the names of any employees, and quite frankly, I'm not sure that I think that would have been appropriate in any case. We received reports as part of our monthly cycle of meetings that indicated how many inspections generally had happened. One of the things that was, I guess it's almost charitable to call it a work in progress, was the almost frustration, certainly the question for the GWC as well as the department about the worthiness of that information. 14 inspections, it doesn't actually tell you anything. So there was a constant dialogue around how does the department get better information to the GWC, and from the GWC, what does that look like? What is that better information?
From your perspective, what information would you have liked to have seen to assist you to perform your role as a member of the GWC?
In reality, I think some of that would have been trial and error. You don't know what you don't know. So I would have expected that to be a bit of an iterative process where we tried for something, and once again, this is personal perspective only. I don't recall the GWC as a body saying, and here's what we want. I think we were still shy of that in terms of time, but it seems to me that there would be some benefit in where inspections were taking place, if there was any consistency in terms of when inspections, I suppose, revealed anything that needed to be reported. Was there any of that consistency? Potentially, if, it would have been interesting, I think, to know that Inspector X didn't ever find anything wrong, whereas Inspector Y was involved in just about anything that was found. Some of those things. Now, why I say it would have been iterative is that might have been interesting to start off with, but as the GWC considered it, found that actually there wasn't a lot of interest in that, or it didn't really inform the GWC well enough. That's all hypothetical.
Are you, and I need you to answer this question because I'm not sure I completely have got the full grasp of what you just said. Are you suggesting that you felt that you didn't have the information, you weren't receiving the information that you thought you needed to perform your role on the GWC fully and completely?
Yep. In regard to the report that we received about inspections, it was mostly around how many had taken place. That didn't tell the GWC much at all, other than that there were that many that had taken place. My understanding from comments made within those GWC meetings was that that was also a matter of some frustration for the department, because it also didn't inform the department of much, and it left the department lacking in terms of what information they could give to the GWC.
If you felt that you were not receiving a report in a form that was effectively informing you, what steps did you take to change that form of reporting?
That was raised in GWC discussions on a fairly regular basis. In fact, I don't think every meeting, but pretty close to, around the GWC members indicating that the information given in terms of inspections didn't actually inform us of much at all, other than the number of inspections.
If this was an ongoing issue,
Yep.
why was it not resolved in some manner by a request for, if you like, to implement some iterative process as you described, or some other mechanism for getting information to you?
My recollection is that, as I described it, a work in progress, there were concerns about there being potential industrial action by those employees within the department, and certainly from a personal perspective, some inspection by people employed to do that was better than the potential of no inspections because people were taking industrial action.
And what was your understanding and I know this may break down to different periods of time.
Yep.
What is your understanding of the nature of the inspections that were taking place? And you can answer that by reference to different periods if there were different types.
This is really trusting memory. Pre the electronic surveillance at the casino, people would be, inspectors would be on the floor seeing what they saw, whatever that might have been. Post the electronic surveillance, they had an ability, as I understand it, to go back at any time and ask to look at particular incidents in detail. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So my next question is, how, if you ask for a better quality of information or a different kind of information, how does that translate into industrial action by the inspectors?
people can take industrial action for a range of reasons, and some of that might be that their numbers are decreased. They don't want to be the one to go. It might be that the parameters of their job changes. It's a personal decision, and I guess from the individuals as well as their respective union.
But by way of example, if their function is to carry out inspections of some kind, they carry out the inspection and they receive information as a consequence of that inspection, and your concern is, well, I want to know more than just how many of these you've done. They're there, they've done it. Surely it's just a matter of them providing you with more information about what they've observed.
Once again, I'm guessing, but my guess would be if they saw that as a change in the way they did their work, they could well have concerns.
So was it expressed to you from the department that they didn't want to change the process because it may result in industrial action?
Yes.
And so that was essentially the answer to your collective concerns about the form in which the material was being presented?
It wasn't ever the end of the story. Certainly not in my time. It's an ongoing issue.
Well, what, if anything, was done? What steps, if any, were taken then to bring about a change in the form of information you received?
My understanding is that the department was at least partway through reforming that section of their operations.
I see, and that's why you described it earlier as a work in progress, isn't it?
Yes.
And was there during the time that you were on the committee, were there reports to you about the progress of that work in progress?
Not with any detail that I can recall.
And over approximately what period of time would you describe it as being a work in progress from when it's first raised concerns to being placed into departmental consideration?
Once again, I'd be guessing if I gave you a time frame.
Okay. Now, were you provided with any information that allowed you to consider collectively as members of the committee, the commission, the cost of performing, in particular, these inspection services?
It sounds familiar to me that there was some conversation around that, but I can't recall any of the specifics.
All right. So, were you provided, or do you recall being provided with information that by which, or was there a process by which the cost and numbers per if you like per area of interest of the GWC was identified? By that I mean casino inspections, more general gaming and wagering activities, and I don't know what other areas, perhaps betting, what other areas were your responsibility, but where it was broken down into, if you like, cost centres.
Once again, I'd be guessing.
Okay. Now, the department provided the government inspectors to perform inspections.
Yes.
Were there any other services, to your knowledge, provided by the department to the GWC? Administrative or other non people on the floor or people observing or auditing the processes at the Perth Casino?
All of the support that the GWC received came from the department.
And was there any, to your recollection, any process by which you identified the nature of the services that the GWC wanted provided, aside from inspections and so forth? As in, what if anything you required by way of accounting, normal administrative support staff, those sorts of things?
Maybe if I answer about the support that we got from the department, and you can tease out anything I
Yes.
miss. So the department, with the GWC's approval, would set the schedule of meetings. They would provide the board papers. That included any research and backgrounding within the particular papers. Included in that was reference to particular elements within the Act and the regulations. Sometimes it would include if there was a history. So, for instance, if an employee at Crown transgressed and was to be fined, you didn't want the fine applied there to be out of alignment with other fines that had been previously given. So some of it would be that background. They took the minutes within the meeting. Any follow-up came through them. It really was all support.
And was there any process by which you identified, in a documented way, what services would be provided on an annual basis by the department to the GWC, meaning inspector services, support services, accounting services, broken up in those categories?
I don't recall that happening. So almost a fee-for-service kind of schedule without the fee. I don't recall that happening.
Well, even the schedule of services, one, but secondly, at what cost the services were to be provided to the GWC?
No.
So in terms of just governance of the GWC itself, how were you able to identify that you were receiving the services you required at a cost that was appropriate for the GWC?
We couldn't.
Was that of any, to your recollection, any concern to any members of the GWC? i.e. that you weren't able to identify within the budget what costs were allocated to what item lines?
We had a budget and we ensured that we ran to budget, or that the department was able to cover any overrun, although I don't remember there being an overrun. I imagine it would have been an issue had we not been receiving those services, but we were, so I don't recall the question being asked.
Okay, can I come back to the budget process? Because I've got some other questions I want to ask you before I get to that, because it seems like it's a particular process that was undertaken each year, which I want to come back to. Now, I just want to return, if I could, just momentarily to the Chief Casino Officer. Was it your understanding that that person reported directly to the GWC?
No.
So what was your understanding of the way in which the Chief Casino Officer reported?
To the department's Director General.
I see. And was there any opportunity, to your knowledge, for the GWC to measure the performance of the Chief Casino Officer in performing that role?
No, my understanding was that the role was entirely within the department's parameters.
So it was not, your understanding was it was of really no concern to the GWC who was appointed, how they were appointed, what the terms of their appointment were, or whether they were performing their role.
I think to say that there was no concern is an overstatement. I think if there was ever an impression that whoever held that position was not performing their role, it would be an issue for us, but that didn't arise in those terms.
How would you have, if the person was not reporting to you, the GWC, and you were unaware of the terms of their appointment and, if you like, the role they're fulfilling, how would you have measured their performance to raise a concern about the way in which that role was being performed?
I think it would have been more in terms of asking a question arising from one of the papers coming to the GWC. If it looked like there were gaps, if it looked like there were omissions.
I see. So I just want to understand the earlier answer then. So I may have used the word directly when I referred to the chief casino officer. Are you saying the chief casino officer did report in some form to the GWC at times?
I don't recall ever receiving a paper that was specific and peculiar to the chief casino officer. You know, there wasn't a chief casino's officer's report. There wasn't anything like that I can recall.
So is it your understanding you received reports from Mr. Connolly when he was in that role as the Deputy Director of the department?
Yes.
Wearing that hat?
Yes. Which is not to say that it wouldn't have been informed by his other position as Chief Casino Officer.
I appreciate that. So, insofar as you were concerned, as a member of the GWC, you were receiving a paper from someone called Mr. Connolly on the subject matter of your business, and you read it and understood it in that context, that he was the Deputy Director of the department and also occupied the office of Chief Casino Officer.
I think that's fair to say.
Okay, now, I may have already asked this question. If I have, I apologise, I've forgotten. I think I did ask you this. Were there occasions when you sought advice from external parties outside of the department? So I have asked this question.
No, I don't know that you have asked it like that. Certainly there would be information from time to time that would come to the GWC from state solicitors. Is that the sort of thing you mean?
Well, that would be an example where you received advice. I don't want you to tell me about the nature of the advice, that you've received advice from outside the department, yes. And you're saying there were occasions when that happened?
Yes.
Were there and were there external, when I say external, I mean non-governmental people from whom you sought advice on matters specific to the regulation of the Perth casino?
The main example is the one already given in terms of checking the integrity of
Yes.
gaming machines.
We've been down this path. I won't return to it. Okay. Now, I would like to ask you some questions about junkets.
Yes.
Now, you're familiar with the expression junket, I take it?
Yep.
What is your understanding of the meaning of junket in the context of regulation of Perth casino?
In very, I suppose, plain English, groups of people, often targeted in terms of who they might be, coming to the casino for a gaming experience.
When you say groups of people targeted, are they targeted in particular, to your knowledge, in a particular area or location?
I think it was all about how much they could afford to lose.
Right, with no. By that I mean, are we talking about international people or are we talking local people as well?
I don't know about local people. It's certainly in my head, I'd always associated junkets with international players.
Okay, now, to your recollection, and again you can break this up into periods during which you were a member of the GWC, was there any regulation of junket operators or junket representatives by the GWC during your time as a member of the GWC?
My understanding is that there was. I also understand that that was ineffective.
The regulation was ineffective. And
Yeah.
I would like to come back and ask you some questions about that. So then, do you recall what the current, if there is any current process for regulating junkets at the time that you left the GWC?
This is a point where I'd like to state that I'm unclear as to how much of my memory is based on actual memory in situ and how much of it is what I now know.
I appreciate
Does that make sense?
If what you now know is a sort of oblique reference to the media reporting and other things, I would like, if you could, to try and cast your mind back and put yourself in the position
Yep.
you were in at the time.
Yep.
So perhaps if I could just ask you, what was your understanding of the GWC's regulation, if any, of junket operators and junket representatives at the time you resigned or as a member of the GWC?
For all the conversation that there was over time about junkets, junket operators, and in that mix, a question of the possibility of money laundering, lots of the conversation was also around the question of whose role those various elements went to. For instance, my understanding is that it's Austrac's business to track the potential of or possibility of money laundering. The WA police, at least for WA and otherwise I guess federal police, have a role in terms of the question of, is this a person with whom we want to do business? So there were elements within the regulations for the GWC that might have looked good on paper but were not able to be policed by the GWC.
That hasn't actually, there's a lot of in that, what you just said I want to explore with you, but it hasn't directly answered the question I asked you, which was, what was your understanding of the regulation, if any, the GWC was undertaking of junkets at the time you left as a member?
I know that there were. I can't give you specifics.
So your recollection is there was some form of regulation of junkets at that time?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, now, insofar as, I'm just talking at the general levels of generality at the moment, so insofar as regulation of junkets goes, what is your understanding of the reason for there being an interest of a regulator, whether it be GWC, a regulator in the eastern states, or Austrac, or the police? What is the concern of those regulatory bodies and criminal investigation bodies in junkets in particular?
For me, any concern was always around the possibility of money laundering.
And what did you understand to be the, if you like, the risk associated with junkets in particular of money laundering?
Once again, a personal perspective. I think if someone is coming into this country, they have a different level of commitment to this country. So if you're an Australian citizen, it feels like you are more inclined to meet your responsibilities as an Australian citizen. If you're a visitor to this country, you don't have those same responsibilities about building an Australian society.
Yes, but that's true of whether they might be involved in money laundering or not. So what was your understanding specifically about junket and junket operators that exposed the Australian community to the risk of money laundering? If you don't know, that's okay as well, but do you have an understanding of that?
I am guessing that if you're part of a junket because you've got lots of money, there could well be a question about how come you've got lots of money.
Right.
And therefore, if it's yours, how much you can afford to lose, gain, take out of the country with you.
So in broad terms, is your answer there are movements and potential movements of large sums of money, the source of which may or may not be legitimate?
I understood that the junkets were about people with money, because otherwise, why would you? As an agent, why would you recruit somebody to be part of a group if that person didn't have money?
So we have a number of people with money, but some people may have obtained that money legitimately and some may have obtained it illegitimately. So
I think that was a question for people.
All right. Now, what was your understanding of how let's take international players as an example, how the money would arrive in Australia?
I don't know that.
Were you aware of any of the accounts that the Perth Casino was operating for junket operations?
No.
Were you aware of whether there were any inspectors undertaking an audit of those accounts from time to time?
I don't know.
Were there any reports that you can recall at GWC meetings where people were reporting to you on activities that involved consideration of the Perth Casino's bank accounts?
No.
Was it something in which you had an interest as a member of the GWC to understand where the money was coming from and how it was being managed within Western Australia?
I think it's fair to say that it was a matter of interest for the GWC. I think it's also fair to say that on a question of such things as Crown's bank accounts, certainly for myself, I would have seen that as not my business. It might have been interesting to know, but I wouldn't have ever expected Crown to report their, in board papers, I would not have expected to see Crown's financial statements.
Not referring so much to the financial statements, but a record or an audit of let's take this in steps. If there was a process by which the funds received, let's just take it as a hypothetical, that Crown Casinos has got a process in place whereby it reports certain types of transactions that are either suspicious or is required to report to AUSTRAC.
Mm-hmm.
Would you not consider it to be of some interest to the regulator of the Perth Casino as to whether they were meeting their reporting obligations to AUSTRAC?
I honestly don't. I couldn't tell you what the information sharing protocols are between those agencies.
But in terms of the systems that they had in place what I'm saying is the systems that the Perth Casino may have had in place for its own purposes to identify reportable transactions or suspicious transactions, was it not something of interest to you as a member of the GWC to ensure that you verified those systems were adequate?
Once again, I'm not sure if this answer is actually to your question. If Crown was required to report to AUSTRAC, I don't know whether Crown would also see or have a responsibility to report to the GWC. They may have, they may not have. And the data sharing protocol is between AUSTRAC and the GWC. I don't know what that arrangement is in terms of if Crown did notify AUSTRAC that AUSTRAC had an obligation to report to the GWC. I don't know those things.
I'm really trying to explore whether you or anyone else on the GWC consider there to be some form of residual risk associated with junkets that may not have been captured by pure obligations to report to AUSTRAC or relying on the police to identify criminal activity after the event.
Once again, don't know that I'm answering your question. Were things like that of interest to the GWC? Yes. Were we concerned that things happened properly within the letter of the law? Yes. Did we always feel that we had a role in unpacking that and finding out what was actually going on? No. Is that your question?
Yeah, I think you're referring to, if I might say, the process of investigating whether there has been historical activity that's, if you like, potentially illegal, where and or.
How would we know?
Well, if you are referring to, you didn't consider yourself to have a role in investigation of crime that had taken place historically, I understand the answer you've given. I'm more focusing here on the question of whether you appreciated or considered the possibility of there being a risk of that activity and that there were systems in place to identify that activity and report it to appropriate authorities.
Once again, don't know that I'm answering your question. Was it of concern? Yes. Was it discussed? Yes. Regularly? Yes. Did we feel like we had the resources or the authority to investigate that ourselves? No.
Would you consider it to have been within the authority and the resources of the GWC to undertake some form of audit, for example, of the governance and risk management procedures of the Perth Casino to consider whether their own systems and governance were addressing appropriately risks such as those in connection with junket operators?
That sounds reasonable.
So was there any consideration given to undertaking an audit of that nature by the GWC to your knowledge?
It feels like that might have happened, but I couldn't give you specifics.
Okay. So is that, when you say it feels like it may, is this an example where you have no positive recollection one way or the other in answer to that question?
No, it feels like it might have happened.
I see.
But I couldn't give you specifics.
Okay. All right. So can I come back to there was when I, if you don't know, you can obviously answer. Are you familiar with there is a power in the Casino Control Act to make regulations concerning junkets?
Answering really precisely, the GWC didn't make the regs.
So who made it? In your
My understanding is that if the GWC wanted a change in the regulations, either that something that was already in there be amended, or that there needed to be a new regulation, or there was not a need for a regulation, that was a recommendation, GWC department to the Minister. It wasn't a decision by the GWC.
Yes, I appreciate that. So there was a process by which the GWC made a recommendation that regulations require an amendment for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
So but in answer to my question, you're familiar there was a power within the Casino Control
To
Act
make recommendations to the Minister? Yes.
for let's say, for regulations to be made.
Yes.
Now, a little earlier you mentioned that there had been some regulation of junkets that you said, I think it was ineffective or worse to that effect.
Yep.
And is that a reference to changes that were made to the regulations at one point in time to remove the requirement for the GWC to if you like, vet operators and representatives of junkets?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
And do you have a recollection now of participating in a meeting about that subject matter? This helps. It was in 2010, early 2010.
I may well have. The minutes of the following meeting would indicate whether I was there or not.
Yes, but you don't. Again, if you don't remember, you don't remember. But do you have a recollection of participating in any meeting at which the regulations were changed in that way?
I couldn't be precise at this time, and this many years on.
All right. Do you have any recollection of what the process was prior to the change for the approval of operators of junkets and their representatives? You don't have a recollection?
No, but
Do you remember how that was regulated prior to the change?
no.
Okay. Now, if I would like to take you to the paper that was presented to the meeting and see if it refreshes your memory at all. So if it does, I would like to ask you some questions about it.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, it doesn't. So this is GWC point 0002, point 0016, point 0001. That's the first page of the agenda papers. And then if we could forward to page 0337, which is item A.2.
Yep.
Can I ask you just to have a quick read of that the beginning of that paper to see if it jogs your memory at all about that matter. And I appreciate this is some time ago, and it may not.
I feel like I need to be able to scroll through.
Would you like that opportunity? I think we might have got it.
Yeah,
Written.
if that's possible.
If there is a hard copy, I think that would.
Yeah, my apologies. I don't seem to produce one for this document.
From the minutes of this meeting, can I have a look at the actual
Yes.
decision, please?
Yes, you can. So if we take it to the minutes, appear at. There's no problem with this one, is there? The minutes appear at GWC 0016.0016.0002. I'll just to draw your attention to the first page of that. Sorry, this is at page _ 0014. I quite long. These are actually not signed. I don't know if we've got a copy of the signed minutes, but it does record that you were present at the meeting. And the specific item number is 8.2 on page 0_0023. Oh, God, it's got highlighting on it. It's fine.
Just getting
0:23. That's it. That's it. 8.2. Item 8.2 at the bottom of the page there. Now, I don't. If you can't remember that, I'm not asking you to try and reconstruct your recollection. But do you have any clear recollection of the events leading up to that resolution? And
It looks familiar, is the best that I can say.
okay, now, can you remember, as best you can now, the reasons? Well, first of all, do you recall whether you voted in favour of that resolution?
Sorry, just before Professor Hayward answers that, I really wonder whether it's fair to her to ask these questions when she hasn't had the opportunity to refresh her memory from the papers.
Yes, well, I agree with you actually, yes. But I was going to ask some questions in a more general sense. Perhaps if I could go down that path rather than trying to deal with the specifics.
Well, Professor Hayward, if you feel that you can't answer the questions without refreshing your memory, then let Mr. Futrell know.
I will, thank you.
I mean, if you would like the opportunity to take 5 minutes to scroll through the agenda paper, we can. And before I ask you the questions, it may actually jog your memory.
Yeah. I can absolutely talk to the way the GWC operated generally. I don't remember at all too many, if there were any, matters on any issue that went to a vote, per se. It's always been my philosophy that if you've got to do that at a board level, there hasn't been enough conversation or information. So it's not a matter of did I vote in favour. I think just under that process, the GWC would have been in agreement with that resolution, and that would have included me.
Okay. I think, Commissioners, I can deal with this without needing to delve into the specifics. So, I think you mentioned earlier, in answer to one of my earlier questions, that there was a consideration that the position or direct regulation of junkets was ineffective, and I think you also mentioned there were other regulatory bodies that were undertaking activities that might be would address some of the concerns. So in that specific context, what is your understanding of how those other bodies were addressing in particular the concerns about money laundering through junkets?
I don't recall any information coming to the GWC that went to how Austrac did its business. I do recall that from time to time, not necessarily on this, that we would get information about how WA Police, not so much how they checked, but what results of their check came. Once again, I'm not sure that that's what you're asking.
No, it is. So if you're understanding, I think you said you didn't get any specifics on how Austrac undertook its activities. How were you satisfied then that the activities of Austrac, the Austrac itself, was going to cater for the risks, if we could put it that way, associated with junket operations in Perth Casino?
I'm trying to get to what you're actually asking. Are you asking, if we didn't know how Austrac did its business, then why could we recommend a removal of regulations that assumed they were? Is that what you were asking?
More or less, yes.
Okay. I don't think that we could reasonably assume, other than that we all expect that government departments, at state and federal level, are doing their job. And if they were charged with that as part of their job, they should have been doing it. I think that's how we live our lives.
Did you... Yes, right.
I mean, I don't have to check with my neighbour if their water is operating. I expect that it is because we've got a water corporation.
So, Professor Hayward, what role do you think Austrac played? What do you think? Oh,
Yeah, my understanding was the tracking of potential money laundering.
when you mean tracking,
Yep.
do you mean tracking and then investigating?
Yes.
Or just tracking?
No, and investigating.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you. Now, is, to your recollection, the only concern related to junkets this question of money laundering, or is there any other aspects to operations of junkets you consider to be?
Attention. This is a test of the fire alarm system. I repeat, this is a test of the fire alarm system. Please disregard all alarms and tones. Thank you.
Do we just wait?
We're going to have to, yes.
Okay.
Have a pause.
Emergency. Evacuate now.
Attention. Attention. This completes our test of the fire alarm system. Thank you for your patience.
I've just developed post-traumatic stress disorder from 5 years in this building.
I appreciate the time. I think that we'll run over time witness today. We'll go past lunch and into the afternoon. If that,
Let's deal with that at 1 p.m. just before we break,
Okay.
because we'll speak to Mr. Sadler about programming.
Mate, please. So, sorry, Professor Hayward, I just wanted to just complete this understanding, or appreciation of your understanding of junket operations. You mentioned one of the aspects of it that was of concern was its ability to facilitate money laundering. Was there any other aspect of junket operators or junket representatives that was, in your view, of concern to regulators, and in particular the GWC?
For me, the question of money laundering, including the means by which people had the money in the first place, was always a concern. I think for the question of, is this person of good character, that kind of question was more a question for Border Control Police than the GWC.
I see. So, so border control was another element or another dimension to the, if you like, other regulatory bodies involved. So, what was your understanding of the checks that would be undertaken by by border controls to, if you like, identify the identity of those involved?
That it's the same answer as when I talk about Austrac. We weren't informed about how they did their business, and I don't know about the data sharing protocol between Border Force and the GWC.
So, and you can disagree with this. I'm going to summarise what you've said in a number of answers. If you don't agree, just let me know.
Yep.
Is it the case that you were provided with information about, in broad terms, that this was being taken care of, money laundering by Austrac, identity of those involved by border control or Department of Immigration, and therefore those concerns were not something that the GWC needed to inquire into?
I don't think we had the ability to inquire into it like those other organisations did.
Okay, but prior to the change in the regulations in 2010,
Yep.
GWC had been inquiring into the identity of those involved. So, would you agree with me it had the ability to at least do that?
I think that's an example when I mentioned that I acknowledge that the regulation was there. I have a question about the effectiveness of its implementation.
So, coming back to effectiveness, just if I could dwell on that for a moment. One way is to obtain the resources to become more effective. So you could, if you didn't have the ability internally to do it, you could obtain resources externally, could you not?
I guess the duplication of resources is always a question, but that's what it would have been. It would have been a duplication.
Duplication of the resources being undertaken by other agencies.
Yeah.
I'm now speaking though of the position prior to the change in 2010, when you were undertaking some regulation, some approval processes. If you thought as an organisation didn't have the resources internally to do that, was any consideration given to obtain those resources?
As I said, the opportunity to request resourcing, to duplicate resources, to undertake work that's the responsibility of another agency, I'm not sure that you would have been very successful.
Okay. Now, a little earlier, in answer to one of my earlier questions, you mentioned that there had been a change in the way that the inspections, I'm paraphrasing, the way the inspections and audits were undertaken on the floor in the casino.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall those questions? Are you familiar with the expression risk-based regulation?
Yeah, not a term that I use often, but yes.
Okay, so what is your understanding of that expression?
That rather than inspection being, this happens at 5 p.m. every Tuesday afternoon, regardless of what else might be happening, that it is irregular, intermittent, and in some ways a surprise.
Okay, and what does do you understand of the risk element of that process? What does that involve? So you've gone from being on the plate.
if a place like the casino knew that inspections happened at 5 p.m. every Tuesday afternoon, they could dress up anything they liked ready for 5 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. If they didn't know when an inspection was going to happen, or how often, or with what regularity, it's much harder for them to do it, which means when the inspection happens, if there is something to uncover or something to see that shouldn't be there, you're more likely to find it.
Okay, now, what was your understanding of the regulatory model employed by the GWC for the Perth casino?
At least post the electronic surveillance, that irregular, intermittent, by surprise.
And by that, would you categorise that as a risk-based approach?
Yes.
Now, after moving to that approach, what was your understanding of the way in which the element of surprise, if we put it that way, would be deployed? In other words, how did they select when, how, and where they would?
That would be for a matter internal to the department.
Was it your understanding that one of the reasons for the reduction in the presence on the floor was because of efficiencies in terms of monetary fiscal efficiencies?
I think there were efficiencies in the surveillance.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if previously you needed an inspector on the floor to be able to have line of sight of whatever was happening, good, bad or indifferent, but with the electronic surveillance you had an ability for an inspector to go in and say, I'd like to see the footage at 11 o'clock last Wednesday and be able to see it. That to me is much more efficient than if you blinked and you missed it, it's gone.
So was it your understanding it was based purely on that operational efficiency rather than a reduction in cost to the department and GWC?
It was absolutely about the efficiency of being able to surveil on a needs or request basis.
So is it your understanding there was no aspect of it that involved budget constraints on the GWC or the department in carrying out inspection and audits?
Oh, there may well have been some financial benefit in not needing so many people, if in fact that's what ended up happening, but that wasn't the basis of any decision.
I see. So your recollection is that the decision was based on creating efficiencies in surveillance.
Yes.
Okay, can I ask you to refer back to your statement briefly, paragraph 36.
Sorry, which number?
Paragraph 36.
Yep.
You made mention to a dip as a consequence of the machinery of government reforms. But what you've gone on to say is that you said that the quality and support given to GWC by the department was satisfactory within the limits of the budget and the availability of full-time employees of the department. In one sense, that might be read as damning with faint praise, insofar as it deals with, you're saying they did a good job with what they had, to paraphrase it. are you intending to say in that paragraph that you thought the budget was inadequate and that the quality and support given to the GWC could have been better had there been more funding available to perform that function?
And or different priorities. For instance, I think at that time around the mould reforms, there was a real push on that now bigger and amalgamated department having a particular focus in the area of local government. So in a whole budget, if that's a priority as determined by the minister, then that's where some of those resources had to go.
I see. So what was it your understanding that you really had no say in the funding you received from the more broadly the government to perform your function?
The GWC had its own budget. We did not have control over the department's budget separate to the GWC budget.
Okay, so in terms of the budget, so if you, for example, considered you needed some additional resources, how are you able to request in your budget the allocation of those resources to GWC, to your knowledge?
The GWC budget went through the same cycle as my understanding is of any other budget. It was proposed as a draft. It came forward to the GWC. The GWC endorsed it or not. If there was a need determined by the GWC for additional expenditure, then the GWC requested that the department find those funds.
Okay, so who prepared the initial budget paper?
The department's chief financial officer.
Okay, and then that was, to your recollection, presented to the GWC for consideration?
Yes.
And how did you review it for, if you like, the adequacy of the funding or adequacy of the things taken into account in it? What material did you receive with it?
Once again, not sure that I'm
Sorry.
answering your question. There was often a comparison in terms of the previous year's budget. Is that what you mean?
No, what I mean is, I think earlier you said, or there were times when we said that we wanted more funding for something in particular, and we requested it. So how are you identifying those things you needed additional funding for?
Well, you couldn't at the time of budget approval because you can only approve within what you know at the time. So you'll approve it for a whole year and it's a year in advance. If something comes up within that year, you can't hold it off till the end of that year before you make your request. It has to be able to be made when there is an issue, if there is an issue.
Okay, I see. So you're talking in that example where there's something not actually dealt with in the budget and the need for an expenditure comes up, you need to request the funds, it's got to be found from somewhere.
Yes.
Can we find the funds for it?
Yes.
Okay. Were there any occasions when you can recall when you were a member of the GWC when a budget prepared by the CFO of the department was not approved?
You can't operate without an approved budget. So we receive monthly statements as well as the annual budget. If there were any matters for clarification, we asked those matters. We asked for that. Sometimes the CFO would attend a meeting to be able to address those questions. In terms of an annual budget being approved, while I don't recall a time, the process would have been, once again, iterative. It would have gone backwards and forwards until the budget was in a form that the GWC could approve it.
So your recollection, was there any opportunity or process by which you consulted with the CFO before the preparation of the budget? So, for example, if you
they'd bring a draft budget, so that's not in advance of the preparation of.
I see. So
the GWC budget for 1 year was largely based on what had happened in the year before. Does that help?
Yes. I think this is probably an appropriate time.
Do you have an estimate of how much longer you might be?
I will be, best estimate, an hour and a half,
Um,
or an hour, say.
Well, it might be better. We have Mr. Duckworth.
Yes, Commissioner, Mr. Duckworth ready to go at 2.
If we were to say for Mr. Duckworth not before 3, and could you inquire of him whether he would be available on the morning of the 26th of May? And would it be appropriate for him to be provided with any particular document or documents to look at?
It would. I had considered that for Professor Hayward. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to undertake the process quickly enough. But it may be beneficial, particularly some of the documents that this morning's information. He had opportunity to read them first.
Well, if I can leave that to you to talk to Mr. Sadler, identify the documents, and is there a clean hard copy of the particular 2010 document that Professor Hayward could look at, or are you not going to go back to that?
We do have it now, and perhaps she could have a review of it over lunch. That would be.
2017.
Which one is this about? That was 2000. That it may also be useful to go to the document at which the change from the risk-based,
Yes.
and I can't remember
can
whether that's 2015 or 2017.
It's 2015.
So perhaps
We can deal with that one as well if you like.
you can deal with those as well. All right. Then 2 p.m.
All rise.